We do have a quorum, and therefore we can get started today for another energy-related briefing. And I'm going to bring up former Senator and now the Director of the Maryland Energy Administration, Paul Pinsky. And Paul, you can go up to the podium or sit at the table, whatever you prefer. And then why don't you want to bring up whoever your team and tell us who you have up, or do you want to just start yourself? It's all up to you.
At the end, I'll introduce everybody.
Perfect. Okay, so Director Pinsky, the floor is yours, and we do have your PowerPoint presentation up on the screen and in hard copy form. So why don't you proceed forward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's great being back and seeing old friends. And that's not about your age, but former colleagues. Thank you. The reason I requested the briefing is to lay down a foundation. You will be dealing with lots of legislation and policy decisions for the next, 80 some days. And having a baseline, we thought would be somewhat important to know the lay of the land when it comes to energy. So that's what we're attempting to do today. And during this presentation, as you'll see, we also throw some policy concerns that won't be resolved today, but that are ones that will probably come up again and again and again. So I asked the chairman if I could get through the slide deck and hold questions until the second half, and I promise we'll go fairly rapidly through the slide deck. So I think the pages are numbered, so if you have questions on a page, just write down what page it is, and we'll come back and answer as many questions. And I do have staff who is a lot more informed and knowledgeable than myself on many of the energy issues. Next. Okay. Our mission is to have reliable energy supply that's clean and affordable. Reliable, clean, and affordable. And results in carbon reduction. And all of that through the lens of Justice 40. You know, too many of our communities have been overburdened and underserved for many years. I don't want to put a number on how long that's been, but it's many years. So that lens is one we use at the agency, hopefully in every decision we make and every dollar we allot. Next, please. If we're a train, speaking of energy, our tracks are running on two rails. One is the Climate Solutions Now Act that this committee moved a couple of years ago, which calls for the 60% reduction by 2031 and net zero by 2045. So that's one rail. And the second rail is the governor's position that he wants to have 100% clean energy by 2035. So they are the tracks that are really driving our work. And they're interrelated, right? I mean, the more clean energy that we create, the less greenhouse gas we have to produce. So they go hand in hand. So they are the two activities that are leading the work we do. Our budget has increased. The alternative compliance payment, ACP, if you will, has gone up pretty significantly, I don't know, a year or two ago. And our budget has actually doubled. So last year we gave out, I think, $94 million in grants and rebates, et cetera, to businesses, residents, nonprofits, as you can see. And it's going to close to double for 25. And I might add that we have sent grants to every county in Maryland, all 24 jurisdictions, as well as to all of your districts. The additional thing, which I'll come back to in a moment, is the IRA Federal Act. That is going to infuse us with approximately $136 million over 5 years. So that's another set of money, which is term limited, and we'll get into that in just a moment. Next. while you're not the budget committee, I like to underline and put in stark contrast, we get no general funds. We're not in the budget with general funds. We are special funded. Our money sits in the SEEF, Strategic Energy Investment Fund, which is made up of two pieces. One is Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, as you know, and every quarter there's an auction for credits. So that gives us close to 2/3 of our money. Does it vary? Yes, it does vary depending on the quarter. But over the last couple of years, it's been moderately stable. And the second pot of money are, as I mentioned, the alternative compliance payments, if people want to pay that instead of purchasing SRECs because of the price. So they are the two segments of money, and it all falls into the C fund, no general funds at all. Okay. Now we're going to get into a little bit of data here. This is a chart of overall total usage. As you can see, natural gas, motor gasoline are far ahead of everything. Nuclear power obviously comes from Calvert Cliffs. And then you have some small areas that are important, but again, in the broad scope of things, fairly small. We consume about 5 times more energy than we produce. And in toto, transportation is the leading component, followed by buildings. They are the top two. Let's go to the next slide, if we can. This tracks our electric sources. Now, we import 40% of our electricity. It's very important to have that understanding. Look, for years, coal was supplied more than half of what we used. It's now fallen to 12%. And the final couple of coal-fired power plants are scheduled to close. Obviously, in recent weeks, I guess now, there's been a discussion about Brandon Shores and Wagner, and it's yet to be determined if they're going to be extended during peaker times or not. But ultimately, the whole goal, because they are the most polluting elements, was to have all of our coal-fired power plants closed down. Not at the same time that coal has come down, not surprising, natural gas has gone up. And as you can see, it's more than tripled in the last 8 years. Renewables make up 12%. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And this is about in-state, and I want to underline this is the in-state of our electricity. 40% comes from Calvert Cliffs. That is scheduled to close in the earlier mid-30s. I don't think there are a whole lot of people who think it will close and it'll get renewed to be extended. To date, and I'm just saying to date, there's been no discussion of adding more nuclear efforts, although one came on board in Georgia, which was the first one in like 30 or 40 years to get granted federal approval. But I have not heard of anything that's on the live wire activity or the fast track in Maryland. So we have Calvert Cliffs, 40% of our energy scheduled to 33 or 35. I could be off by a year, and I expect they will be renewed. Look, another area of clean energy, which we don't think about a lot, is the Conowingo Dam. It's clean energy. It's hydropower, you know very well. It provides about 5% of the state's total generation. Okay, let's go to next page. Now we're going to go into solar. And over the next few minutes, I want to touch on solar, offshore wind, electric vehicles and infrastructure, and the things that you probably are going to have very concrete questions about. Okay, the growth in solar, you see 2016 was a high point. Then it came down pretty drastically. That's probably because of multiple factors. Renewable energy credits, an effort when things were unleashed in 2016 of people who wanted to do right by the environment, who wanted to put solar on their roofs. There was a momentum. I was going to say energy, but that's overused today. My bad puns remain. And if you look on the left at the bottom, it gives you a sense of where we are in terms of how the breakdown of the energy. Utility scale, that's 2 gigawatts, or well, it's anything larger than 2 megawatts. Residential is in all likelihood rooftop, and then you have commercial. So we're going to break this down and try to put this under a much more careful microscope in just a moment. So let's go to the next page. And this is a very important chart, particularly because some people in this room helped write the RPS law in another committee. The law requires 14.5% coming from solar by 2030. And I want to repeat that, 14.5% solar by 2030. That's in the law of Maryland. If you look at this chart, we broke apart and are trailing the trajectory that we would need to follow if we were going to make that target of 2030. So we are behind. Starting in 2018, we've fallen behind. So we're confronted with an issue. Do we worry about breaking the law, or do we ramp things up to achieve what this legislature said was the right policy going forward? So I don't want to underestimate the chart. And you as a committee can decide, do we ignore the law? Do we change things to try to get it on trajectory where we can reach our goal by 2030? So we might be referring back to that. Let's go to the next one. And this is where we break out each category. And again, I do want to point out that on the y-axis, that's the one on the left that runs vertically, the numbers are different on the charts. So I don't want to confuse anybody or mislead. The y-axes are different. Okay, the first one is residential, top left. High point was 2016, and then a major drop-off. Again, it could be for multiple reasons. Rec prices, or the willingness of people who wanted to put it on their roofs because they thought it was the right thing to do. And after that first wave, who had the money to do it, the $25,000, whatever it cost, after that wave was done, it might not have been able to sustain itself, either because of the will or the money. So as you can see, it's been pretty flat over the last 4 years. It's something to consider. You're going to hear more from the rooftop energy industry. I'm sure you will. If you move to the next chart, to the northeast, commercial rooftop solar, it had a similar but less pointy trajectory. In 2016, it had a pretty decent high point, and then it's flattened out. And again, I want to remind you that its high point was 30 megawatts, opposed to 2016, it was 170 or so megawatts in the residential area. Bottom left, this is commercial ground-based solar. That's probably a lot of community solar. And in community solar, and community solar is ground mounted, where let's say you're a working family or a low income family, and you want to lower your bill, but you rent and you don't own your own house where you can put solar on your roof, you can subscribe to a community solar project and have your bill go down 10, 12, 15, 17%. So that's community solar. Now they're privately owned and they have to go door to door to subscribe people. And that in itself is a problem because people have been hustled too much and scammed too much. But commercial ground base, a good portion of that is community solar. And that's had a much more significant upward trajectory than residential or commercial rooftop. And finally, the bottom right, and this is a utility scale, that's over 2 megawatts. These are, you drive by some of these, there's some on the Eastern Shore, there are a couple on the way in Anne Arundel County, a few other places. These are multi-acre, I hate to call it farm, but it's a big array that goes on for acre after acre after acre. And that is utility scale over 2. It could be as high as 5, 10, or 15 megawatts. So these are producing a lot of energy. And that trajectory since 2018 has been going up pretty significantly. So if you look at the first one on residential and the last one on utility, you see some of the challenges that are faced in the solar industry and that you'll be faced in making decisions going forward. Okay, let's go to the next area, next one, slide 12, if we would. And this gets back to that community solar concept. And again, it's usually subscriber. You lower your bill, and for whatever reason, you know, you can't put it on your own roof, which may have a greater savings at the back end. You have a smaller savings, but it does decrease your bill. And they are at various places, wherever it can be ground mounted. In most cases, it can be a rooftop on a Walmart, for example, if a developer works that out with the private company. But these are ground or rooftop mounted. It's much larger than a rooftop on a residential home. And it is showing a fair amount of growth. You can see the numbers. I'm not going to read them to you. We think it's a great opportunity, particularly for working and poor families who live in apartment buildings who can't put it on their own roof. We also give grants to community solar organizations to help the effort to sign up people to subscribe to it. We think it's a real growth opportunity. So that's community solar. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Incentives. We have grants to local governments, nonprofits to install solar on homes of Marylanders in their communities. And we're looking at expansion, and this is very important to us, to put solar on apartment buildings and other multifamily dwellings. We think there's a great opportunity, and we are trying to figure out how we build a program around that to make sure the residents benefit from their electric bill and that the owner or the manager of the building is fit into the equation as well. Solar canopies, we're making pretty big push. We believe there are parking lots, landfills, brownfields that can all be used. I use the example of the airport. Now, sometimes there are glare issues, and we understand that. You know, the planes coming in, they see the glare. But I parked way too many times in a long-term lot at A or B. They're humongous, you know, and I know the Department of Transportation is also looking at this, and whether MEA initiates a government-wide initiative or each agency does it, there is a very important effort going on. So I want to be clear, we are pursuing every opportunity for solar. We're going to talk about in the rural area and farms. We'll get to that in a minute. But we don't think there's one solution here. We want to use the opportunity to wherever we can do it, particularly where there are multi-uses. Now, that being said, it's important to understand if you're doing a parking lot array, for example, that means you got to go up at least 10 or 12 or 14 feet, and it's more metal or steel that goes into it. So there's a price factor here. You know, in a lot of these cases, prices are the determining factor. A developer's going to look at the profit margin. How much is it going to cost to install it? What am I going to get in return? So, you know, and that goes to not only how much solar panels and how much metal or steel goes into it, but also buying property or leasing property. As we know, Ellicott City, for example, property values are not going to be the same as Dorchester County. That's just the market, you know. So I think we have to understand those variations as well. Let's go to 14. I got to pick up the pace here. This one I want to highlight. We've had a program called SERP. Anybody who puts in solar rooftop can apply for a rebate. No income limits. So we have, I think, 5 million budgeted for this year. I think last year was 3 or 5. I can't remember. You need to understand this is a $23,000 to $27,000 project, and this allows someone to ask for a rebate of $1,000. Would they have built it if they didn't get that $1,000? We don't know. We think they probably would have. Is it an enticement? Do the developers say, we'll get you $1,000 if you do this? Yes, but it's pretty important to understand that that first wave and second wave have primarily been in middle class, upper middle class communities, and probably white communities at that. And that's where this money is gone. And that's a question that I'm going to raise as to where we invest our money. So that's the what we call the SERP program, solar incentive. Now let's go to the question. And siting is a big issue. We know it's a big issue. You'll probably have bills on that issue in front of you this session. To reach our goals combined of community solar, utility solar, our numbers show about 35,000 acres of land, but there's no plan, there's no master map of where that should be. So it could be in West Baltimore, it could be in Baltimore County, it could be in Dorchester County. So nothing's been assigned. There's no mandate or requirement. Wherever it gets built, the owner of the land has to be willing to lease that land to the developer to put in, whether it be community solar or utility scale solar. And if the project is over 2 megawatts, the state takes the lead. I think I saw PPRP here, Bob is here. It goes through a state process with it ultimately going to PSC. And if it's below the 2 megawatts or 2+ megawatts, state doesn't have ultimate authority. The local jurisdictions do. So, and for example, for utility scale, you can't just put it anyway. There are other conditions. You have to be near where you can hook up to a substation. You know, so it's not like they're going to be helter-skelter placed every which way. They can't be. They won't be approved. Okay, let's go to 16. Our estimates are that depending on what assumption you make as to how much will be ground mounted and how much will be rooftop, less than 2% of Maryland's total farmland will be needed to do this. Could it be 1.5%, 2%? Again, it depends on your assumptions, but our assumptions are it'll be less than 2% of available farmland. And of course, we are pursuing, and I know Department of Agriculture is, dual use. What use can we use where you can put it on farmland, but still utilize the ground beneath it? Obviously, it's hard to grow crops when they can't have the sun. There's been talk of dairy cattle, of goats and sheep. We don't have a lot of goat farms in the state, but we are interested in pursuing that as well. Let's go to 17. Here's some pressing concerns. With limited funds, where should MEA focus? Should it be on rooftop? Should it be on community? Should it be on utility? If we have to reach 100% clean energy by 2035, or we have to reach a 14.5% carve out for solar by 2030, what's going to get us there the quickest? Or should our decision be based on supporting an industry? There are people who are saying, well, our industry is really affected. And then you've got to decide, do we prop up an industry, or do we or should we pursue our mandated requirement by the RPS law? And there's some judgment calls here of priorities. And also, what income levels? The governor said we want to leave no one behind. As I said, we're using a Justice 40 kind of lens. How much should be spent and I'll use an example of a upper middle class family. Should they get $1,000, or should we give multiple thousands of dollars to a lower moderate income family that does own their own house, can't afford it? Do we give $15,000 or $20,000 to them to put solar on their roof? So how do we balance out who should receive the money that we have available to us? And of course, agricultural land and restrictions. Okay, let's move on. Offshore wind, page 18. We have two companies that have two sets of projects. US Wind has the one closer to Ocean City, more south. And then you've got Ørsted that has Skipjack, which is more northerly. They together have about 2 gigawatts of power. And then they have another 1.1 of unallocated. That's 3.1 gigawatts of potential power. But the fact is, nothing has been built yet. Nothing has been built yet. And we know one of the companies had an investment in New Jersey and pulled out. And we're awaiting word from Ørsted what they plan to do in Maryland. And we know a lot of these are financial concerns. And we don't know what their needs are and if they want to come back to the legislature or the PSC to relook at their deals. We know along the East Coast, things have almost stopped because of international finance and the difficulty in pursuing it. So, we can't count this till it's in the ground. We're not generating energy at the moment. So that's 3.1 that's committed, but not yet built. Next page, we were just granted what's called A2 by the federal government, by BOEM. That is the orange area at the top of the map. It was about half of our request. And this area called A2 would amount to 2 gigawatts, approximately. So if you add 3.1 gigawatts and 2 gigawatts, that gets to 5.1 gigawatts. It does not get us to 8.5 gigawatts. And I think that's important to acknowledge. There'll be a leasing of that area put up for bid in the summer of 24. Okay. Also on offshore wind on the next page, we are still committed to building up a supply chain. There are a lot of companies that want to build this or build that to help the offshore wind, whether it's building part of the turbine, whether it's the cable. There are a number of facilities now at what used to be Bethlehem Steel, Sparrows Point, and we're proud of that. And one company, Hellenic Cable, that came in with Ørsted, understands that things have slowed down along the coast and they are now shifting to onshore cable. And they had rented lease space at Wagner Point, and there was concern that they were going to walk away at the end of the lease, but they have renewed that lease. So we are trying to promote and keep active the supply chain organizations, which can bring in jobs, bring in revenue, and keep things moving. And finally, workforce training. We have a workforce training grant on the Eastern Shore with Arcan, I think it's called. I could be wrong. And also one in West Baltimore. So we are helping fund a number of training facilities so people are prepared to work on offshore wind or the supply chain. And in a lot of these cases, they're training minorities and bringing them into the industry as well. Okay, future concerns, and I'm almost done here. We will need additional areas. One, we want to make sure the ones that are on the schedule get built. One company said they still would like to have it built in 27. We want to get it live. We want to, the idea of being able to electrify 2 million homes is pretty damn important, and it would reduce our dependence on other fossil fuel energy types. We want to keep projects on track, and we want to keep the supply chain investments proceeding. Okay, last section, electric vehicles on 22. We have about 92,000 electric vehicles that are registered. There are 1,600 public electric charging stations. They're public. Many people have it in their own home, in their own garage, which we at MEA have given grants to try to encourage that. And we have a grant program, which is the third bullet, where we actually give some money back to 30 or 40% to the people who upgrade their electric box so they can charge at their own home. That would be a level 2 charger. Okay, let's keep going. We have a program to help fund medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicles. We have a program where we funded Cisco, the food distributor. They're supposed to have a truck in town this week. I think the snow stopped that. So we have funds to try to encourage that in the commercial sector. And we are looking at, the price of EVs has come down, particularly the smaller ones. I mean, pretty significantly. So they now are more available, not just for the upper middle class, but for working families. But the question becomes, can they charge it? Let's say they're living in an apartment building. So we want to make sure that there are enough EV charging stations in urban areas near apartment buildings, so people are encouraged to purchase EVs and make it comfortable, not difficult. Look, is range anxiety real? Yes, it is. People want to be able to charge it and charge it easily. So we are trying to work with multifamily and other places in the low and moderate income areas to encourage more purchase of vehicles. Okay, energy efficiency. We have grants to local governments and local communities. Empower, obviously, you've dealt with that issue and are experts in it. I assume you'll be facing it again this year since it wasn't completed last year. And I want to go combined technologies. 2 years ago or 3 years ago, this committee visited a number of schools, one in Baltimore, and then Howard County, which were net zero schools. They were built, I guess, 6 years ago. We are committed to doubling that number. So we have either doubled, tripled, or quadrupled our money for decarbonizing public schools. We would like to get 3 more zero emission schools across the state and have more schools put solar on the roof, shift to geothermal, shift to heat pumps. So we're making a big effort on decarbonizing schools. Smart energy communities. We have a program that if a community or a municipality does 2 or more efforts, whether they put solar on the roof of their community building or their town hall, and they put in a set of chargers in the downtown area, we have grants for that. We've given at least 60 or 65 grants to do that. So whether it's in Fedelsburg or whether it's in Columbia, we want to build this infrastructure and get communities to do it not just in a one-shot deal, but 2 or 3 areas as well. And finally, the open energy is where we fund innovative programs, energy programs. And let's just jump to 27. This is about the IRA bill. And I mentioned we're expecting $136 million. And there's 2 programs. One is energy efficiency rebate program. You've probably received calls at home. You know, I put in new windows or a new refrigerator. Can I get the federal money? Unfortunately, we don't have that money yet. The feds have not released that money yet. So you have to tell the people, sorry, but we can't send a rebate yet until we get the money and set out parameters and policy to back that up. The other one is the HERE program, and that's to move towards electrification. And this totals $136 million over 5 years. So we're excited about that. We're going to need some of this money to hire people temporarily to oversee the applications, the funding, whatever it calls for. And finally, what we call TREC, Training for Residential Energy Contractors. One of our biggest problems, let's say you have a gas run HVAC system and it goes kaplooey, it dies. And you call a contractor out to the house. Well, if a contractor comes out and is familiar with the heat pump, he or she may say you should consider a heat pump. But if you have a contractor comes out who's never worked with a heat pump, they're simply going to say, here's how you replace your hot water heater or your HVAC system and just continue to work on natural gas or oil. And we believe we need to electrify over the next period of time. It's the only way we're going to really wean ourselves away from oil and gas, which after coal are contributing to a lot of the greenhouse gas emissions. So educating the contractors, whether they be a company of 200 or a small contractor who's got 1 truck, they need to understand, one, how they can purchase a heat pump, how to install it, because if they don't know how to install it, they don't want to give the business to a competitor. So we're looking forward to this money. This is a high priority for us. We think a lot of the education are the people in the homes, on the streets, the small business people, and we think that's very important. And finally, 28 is a sort of a summary. We have spent the last year refocusing our mission and vision, changing our programs, installing a Justice 40 lens, and shifting from how we spend money to what we think will get us to the 100% clean energy in a more rapid way. So we are available to help you in any way we can. I know I went through this fairly quickly. Let me say that Landon Farrig, that many of you know, will be here during the session. And Evie Schwartz, Evie, stand up, please. Will also be here during the session if you have questions about any of the policies, and they all have their areas of expertise. Evie staffed the solar task force, whose report you should have in a week or 2 or 2.5 weeks. So we have the expertise with us today. We have a number of other people. Eric Kaufman, our director of programs. Eric, Ian is here, who you all know very well, or he should be here, back there. And there may be some others. So let me stop there. I said we could take time for questions. Mr. Chairman, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Director Pinsky. That was very thorough and I think very informative. So thanks for coming in. I did want to make a note that Senators Washington and Watson would love to be here, but they are representing the committee in a couple of other hearings where we're jointly assigned, so that's no boycott on the topic here. Just a couple Let me just lead off with just two quick ones. First of all, I think it's a typo, but page 22, you have a number for registered electric vehicles as of 12/31/24, which has not yet happened. So I assume
Whoops.
that means 12/20,
Yes,
23.
thank you.
Last session, I'm back on EV infrastructure. We had a bill here that we did pass dealing with new construction of homes, but we basically punted the ball on the multifamily component. And you do have this multifamily EV study that you reference on page 23. Where is that? I think Landon's maybe working on that. I think you can give me update. Where are we on that study? Because that may be another bill for this session still. And but I think we're awaiting your study before moving forward on that.
Eric Kaufman, Division Director of Energy Programs, Maryland Energy Administration, for the record. We are wrapping up a study. We had taken in a lot of public feedback. And as we finalize the results, we want to make sure that we're inclusive of that feedback. We had a lot of feedback from multifamily property owners, the companies that deploy EV charging as well. So I would say we are very close to having that available.
Rough timeline where they won't.
Yeah, I mean, we're in like bill request deadline. I mean, there's some things happening here. So can you be a little more specific with that?
A safe estimate would be 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay. And then the only final question, Director Pinsky, is I know that you were involved. We passed the bill creating the task force, Senator Elfreth sponsored. I know MEA was involved with that. They are due to give us a report maybe in the next week or thereabouts with a lot of incentives. How do we jumpstart the solar industry with a lot of different legislative recommendations, some of which will land in this committee? You were part of it. I mean, if you might, could you give me just a perspective? As far as, are there things in there, and I don't know if you're at liberty to say this, but I mean, are there things in there that you would take exception, disagree with, there's some things that you think are maybe coming down the pike? I just want to, you're here, you were part of the work group. They're coming, with a report with specific recommendations, and whether it's a dissenting point of view, I would just welcome your thoughts on.
Let me start, and then I'll pass it on to Ms. Schwartz. There are some programs like rooftop solar. What should the support be? And we don't say an actual number in the report, and we don't set the income level, but we imply that there should be it should be bifurcated. Not to complicate people and get too deep in the weeds, but now a lot of details based on census tracts. And certain census tracts, if they have whatever the percentage of low minority people in the census tract, will qualify. But the fact is, everyone in the census tract will also qualify. So that means if you have people of upper middle income who are in that census tract that has some level of poverty, they would also be eligible. So the report bifurcates it, but it doesn't say what the income level should be or how much they should receive. It leaves it soft, either the legislature or to MEA, to make some of those decisions. So we want to continue them. And we have one program, and I know I move very quickly. We have a program for low income people who do own their own houses, but are low income. We will provide up to $25,000. No more than $5,000 that can be for repairing the roof, because some of these homes are in pretty disrepair. You don't want to put solar panels on a roof that's going to collapse. So look, $25,000 is a lot of money. You're using a lot of money for fewer homes, but you are hitting those that are less fortunate. And again, this gets to policy decisions of middle income, upper middle income, or even solar rooftop itself. Is that where you should be putting X dollars as opposed to community solar, for example? Because there's not unlimited funds, essentially. While our budget went up, it's not going to go up forever. So there's X amount of dollars. Ed, do you want to talk about any other recommendations in the report?
And I guess I should preface that we haven't seen the report yet. Do we know when this report's coming to us?
Well, let me take responsibility. We were hoping to finish before December. We just couldn't. So we had to have a meeting after the new year. It's going through a review now, the report. And I started reading it yesterday and I saw some areas that needed correction. So I'm hoping in a couple of weeks, it's going to have to go through the second floor, of course. And then hopefully we'll get it to as soon as we can.
Same thing. We're obviously on a 90-day clock, and if there's some things in there we want to, get into the hopper, if you will. Okay,
Yeah,
do you want to weigh in, and then we'll take some Q&A from the
Yep.
committee.
Evie Schwartz again, Maryland Energy Administration, staff for the Solar Task Force. And just wanted to mention, first of all, about the timeline. The recommendations that were voted on are already available on the Solar Task Force website. So they are the short version of each recommendation. So that is already available. It's the longer text that discusses that captures all the robust discussion and debate that is going to be more available in the longer report. But I do encourage you to take a look at the short version that just shows each recommendation that was voted on and which ones were adopted and which ones were not. In terms of just the scope of the task force and where there was a lot of consensus around several of the recommendations. We covered tax incentives. We covered recommendations around permitting, around interconnecting to our grid, around our workforce and supporting minority businesses. Those areas actually did have a lot of consensus. The places where there is continuous debate and continuous study moving into session and moving into the next couple of years is mostly around the solar renewable energy credits, which is one of the biggest tools to influence the solar market. So there's definitely more study going on amongst the industry as well as internal to MEA and among every stakeholder around that market and using that tool most wisely. And that's where a lot of the questions that Director Pinsky raised are really important on which sector the incentives go most towards. The other thing that continues to also was a lot of debate on was the prioritization of the alternative compliance payments, the ACP funds that support a lot of MEA's programs. And so, yeah, I'd say those are some of the biggest areas where there's continuous discussion, but please, please do.
That's actually very helpful. Okay, we're going to start with Senator Augustine, then we'll go to Senator Brooks, and then Senator Carozza, and then Senator Kagan.
All right. Thank you, Chair.
I can't see.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Director Pinsky, good to see you. Just a couple of questions for you all. Just for my education, we're going to have these public EV charging stations. Where does the revenue from them go?
Excuse me. If they're owned privately and they're operated in community, many of them, it'll be revenue to the company itself that operates it. Part of that revenue will be essentially, you've got capital and you've got operating on a unit will be applied to that. And if it's owned in a business, it may be provided, at no cost in many cases to people who visit that business.
Okay, so we're not going to have, like, MDTA has a certain number of public ones that we're not going to have a whole lot of that. It's primarily scheduled to be private.
The public, I think you're misreading public. Public is opposed to being in your own home. In other words, it's on Main
Street.
Street.
Understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
The public means anybody can use them. They're on a Main Street. They're a business.
Okay. So there won't be.
They aren't owned by the state.
There are not going to be any owned by the state at all.
There are charging stations that have been installed by the Department of General Services that are available to visitors of state buildings. But the majority of charging out there is either in homes and businesses, or, as Director Pinsky mentioned, community-based charging, which is available to people to use either at a retail center or another place where people park and can charge up.
Okay, now, all right, I get that. And so the money that we are investing in that basically is just going to the developer then. And we don't get that's just an investment that we're making in helping to make them work like pencil out, basically.
We're essentially defraying part of the capital costs of the installation.
Okay, okay, that's helpful. Mr. Chair, one more question that I have, and this kind of is interesting in our new connection now between environment and energy now. I was listening to the requests or the requirements for 35,000 acres of land that we need that you mentioned. And I think you're a good person to ask this question. Something that I have thought about is like program open space land and whether or not it would make sense to allow for an acceptable use on program open space land. If renewable energy and solar and stuff like that would be because we have, I think as I look at it, like 400,000 acres in protected space right now. Do you have any opinion about that?
You know, I think that's come up, Senator, and I'm open on the question. I think we got to figure out what works and whether the use of that open space land was for particular purposes or not, and whether it can be restored. But I think if we want to get the 14.5% carve out and meet our goals in 2030 or 2045, it's going to take a heavy lift. So I think we're going to have to look at lots of things to get there.
Okay, all right.
And again, part of it's cost, which I've said 3 times. You know, it's expensive to buy 3 acres in downtown Baltimore or in Columbia or Rockville.
Right, but would you agree that where we have land that's already in a protected
No,
space?
I think it should, anything and everything should be considered. So I would not take it off the table.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good question, because that topic, you know, I got the Ag Reserve in Montgomery in my district. I mean, these topics have come up a lot, actually. Okay, we're gonna go to Senator Brooks next, and then we're gonna go.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Director Pensky, for a comprehensive report. Looking at your page 11, yeah, the residential scale solar and how it was at its peak in 2016, and it dipped down to started going down in 2018. And I know that the investment tax credit, the federal investment tax credit, it was going well then, but and then eventually it was going to be phased out in 2022. So I was wondering whether or not that had an impact, because you could get like a 30% credit on the total project, yeah, but it was going to phase out to 26% and then 24%, and by 2022 completely gone. But thank God our federal partners were able to bring that back to life, and with a 10-year extension, so now it goes to 2032. Yeah, but that was a nice incentive to get people to invest in solar, you know, because it's all about incentives, especially with the new technology. And just on some quick math, you're talking about how to get people to invest in that technology. I think on the federal side at 30%, I know some counties, like Baltimore County, for instance, they were given like a $5,000 credit towards your property taxes. You know, they were like 2 years behind, but if you didn't use it all the first year, you could use it the second year. And now the state was given a $1,000 grant. It's still at 1,000. I think that grant, I would hope that it would be, you know, go up. And I think there's some doing the task force that you guys going to try to get that increased.
Well, Schwartz, there were some tax credit recommendations on property tax. Do you have that?
Yeah, we've got several. That doesn't address the federal tax credit. The federal tax credit, for the record, the federal tax credit is 30%. So that has been continued. There are several recommendations from the Solar Task Force for state tax exemptions. The other, again, bringing up the solar renewable energy credits, the other thing to keep in mind is that the value of those credits has declined over the past several years. So they were a couple $100 a pop 5 years ago, and now they're about $50, $60 each on the solar renewable energy credit market. So that's also a big one. And you can speak to SERP.
No,
Okay.
and I was
level.
gonna add to that, the federal tax credits as well as for many projects can get, depending on where they're located, the amount of domestic content in steel and aluminum, who they benefit, can actually get more than 30%. There are actually bonus credits that can boost that for many projects. In terms of the clean energy rebate program, I think there's a key distinction here between a program that
Get the
builds.
mic. Make sure.
Oops, apologies. Distinction between a program that builds awareness and gets people to think about adopting solar, and one that provides a substantial assistance to those who may not be able to access solar. And that's one of the considerations as we have these conversations about where to deploy limited funds best, and the recommendations of the task force and working with stakeholders we're working through.
Yeah, and I would say back on the rec price, that's been kept down by the ACP price, and the alternative compliance payment is stepping down in 25 and 26. So it could have a detrimental effect on incentives. And, we're not here with a recommendation or legislation, but it is an issue of concern.
Sure.
Okay, also, you had mentioned about, on page 17, 17, the, local restrictions on solar below 2 megawatts. Yeah, and then I know there's some local government, county government, I know, like for instance, Baltimore County, the maximum solar farm you can have in any particular district is 10. And there's some particular districts, councilmatic district is already at that capacity, but people still want to install some solar farms, and I think you're right. We can nudge the county to get them to allow more, because we're not going to reach those goals if there are going to be those kind of restrictions. Yeah.
Well, Senator, I mean, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
We have this goal we're supposed to meet in
Right.
law, but yet there are these restrictions. And I'm going to give you another example. And this is not utility scale. This is community solar. Let's say 1 megawatt, where one jurisdiction was requiring the setback to be, I can't remember how many feet, but to such an extent, the project would never get built. And there are some communities that don't, I don't want to say feel welcoming or are welcoming to these projects. And I understand there's some communities that are saying you're deluging us with all of this, and we don't want to be inundated with all this in just our community. And I get that, I get that. We just have to have some kind of understanding that if we need to fulfill this, how do we do it in a fair way? And like I said, we are pursuing every area. I mean, brownfields, parking lot arrays, but they're not going to solve this problem. They just aren't. They aren't going to give us enough energy to get to the 14.5% or the 100% by 2035. They just aren't. So that's the reality. And again, look, I've been a supporter on this committee of protecting green space and not having townhouses on every farm. We had a septic bill a number of years ago, and I supported to keep townhouses off our farms, to keep them green. And I want to keep them green. And if we can get dual usage, that's great. But it's going to take all the above to do it.
And this last one will be real quick,
Sure.
Chair.
Go on.
On page 6.
Page
6, yes, yeah. And that's Maryland overall energy usage. And you were talking of, natural gas is our greatest consumption, but then nuclear, that's what, 40% for Maryland?
Yeah.
Yeah, that I was looking at the capacity factor for these, and there's a capacity factor for nuclear. I mean, that's how long it is producing, 92.7% of the time, with the capacity factor for natural gas is 54.4%, So, I guess in trying to arrive at those goals, would one argue that nuclear is going to have to be part of the equation?
Senator, it's a great question. I usually try to duck that one. Look, nuclear objectively is part of the equation.
Right.
You know, some people call it clean energy, some don't. It doesn't create greenhouse gas emissions.
Right.
I don't know if it's officially in tier 1. I don't think it is. It's sort of over there on the side.
Right.
I think it will be nearly impossible to reach our goals without it.
Okay.
So taking it offline will be very, very difficult. But again, the whole nation has not moved forward in any significant way
Right.
because of the cost of nuclear. I mean, like I said, Georgia opened one in the last 5 months. It's the only one in like 40 years.
Right.
I mean, nothing has been approved. So I think it is part of the equation. Look, even though there's capacity for natural gas, we want to get away from reliance on natural gas, because then we'll still have this problem of a worsening environment and more severe storms and rain and flooding, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, the other thing I didn't mention is saltwater intrusion. I mean, the more we have sea level rise, we're losing acreage on farms. They can't grow if it's got salt in the water. So this is in everybody's interest to try to resolve this. And again, we're one state of 50 in a world of many nations, but we have to do something to move ahead.
Okay. Thanks for the answer, sir. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, just one quick comment, because you did touch on it earlier on the incentive topic. I just have to say, it always comes down to, are the incentives changing behavior? Or are they simply rewarding behavior that, you know, was going to happen anyway? And so when you talked about the $1,000 and a $25,000 project, I think that's the right kind of analysis you have to get into as we deploy scarce resources. And so I'm looking forward to this report.
At that
You know,
very carefully.
Absolutely.
I think it's been ignored in the past for the last number of years. We are looking at it, putting it under a microscope.
absolutely. Okay, we're going to go to Senator Carrozza next, and then we're going to go to the vice chair and then to Sylvester. Okay, Senator Carrozza, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I only have one question, but I have a little bit of a lead in, so to get there. You led Director Pinsky with your focus on solar, and then we went to other energy sources. You noted in your presentation with offshore wind that nothing has been built, and you're probably aware that there's a congressional hearing this Saturday. Multiple issues and questions continue to be raised, including concerns from the military. You also talked in your presentation about the electrical vehicles, and what also has been brought to our attention from the auto dealers, and I represent auto dealers in the Salisbury, Berlin area. They have brought multiple issues about reaching the goals, everything from I represent a border district, from constituents, consumers going across the Virginia line and Delaware line, which are just minutes apart from my district, purchase cars, bring them back, title them in Maryland, and the emission, we still have nothing changes with the state's emissions, to the fact that we've got some resource issues with the EV batteries. My understanding is you have to move 500,000 pounds of dirt and extract 100,000 pounds of minerals to get 500 pounds of refined materials to make one battery. We've talked a little bit about the challenges with the infrastructure that's not there. Our chair took us up to PJM and we talked about reliability issues. When you have honest discussions to the auto dealers, they're saying that the consumer demand's not there. They're saying, why don't you allow hybrids, which a lot of us drive, to count for more to making the goals? My understanding is the manufacturers can make 90 hybrids with the same amount of minerals used to produce one battery electric vehicle. You've got complex maintenance issues. You've got charging time, people who don't have time to spend a couple hours waiting for a charge, and to charge every 200 miles. So what I'm leading back to is we have the policy and a law. We have people on the front lines bringing us the issues of the challenges with offshore wind, the challenges with moving with the EVs. And yet I noticed that you made a point to lead with solar. So do you, from a policy standpoint, do you see that's more the pathway to meeting the goals when you, again, when you have, you know, nothing with construction with offshore wind, and you have, you know, multiple challenges on the EV front, and yet obviously there's solar challenges as well, but it struck me that you led with that, and we spent most of the time in this briefing on solar.
Yeah, Madam Senator, leading with solar in the presentation was not a conscious that this is where the primacy is. So let me just be clear. We could have led with EVs, we could have led with offshore wind. So I think we have to move on all fronts. You know, offshore wind, I mean, to think that when this is done, we could power 2 million homes. I mean, I can't even imagine how many rooftops that would take to do. And we think that is a major, major future. It's offshore, it's wind, and you mentioned the Department of Defense. You know, we made a request for new lease land, and they approved half. So like the A2 that I referred to, they had no problem with. And the areas under US Wind and Ørsted, they've been approved. They have gone through the process, and DOD does not have a problem with those facilities. If they did, they wouldn't have made it this far. So they reviewed, when BOEM, the Bureau of Offshore Energy Management, wants to lease land and have an auction, all the stakeholders, and I can tell you, Department of Defense is probably the first in line, will say, this is our shipping lanes, that's a no, or these are our Air Force, no. And so they have cut out lots of this. So if it is made, it passed this, it means it has passed muster on that. So I think it's a great thing. I think we have to do it. Obviously, the international financial market has slowed it down considerably. In terms of automobiles, I was at an event on the Eastern Shore when I heard a presentation from the head of the National Auto Dealers Association. And I have to tell you, I was astonished. It basically denied there is a climate change problem in our society, in our nation. And I think a lot of people in the auto industry are getting some false information if the president of the national organization is essentially denying that there's a climate problem. I just do. Look, I have a electric car. I get 300 miles to the charge. My understanding is plug-in hybrids will be counted. And you know, I think we have to get as many infrastructure charging stations. We have to have the price drop. We know some people are concerned that either they're sitting on their lot, and I understand that. And we have to figure out some other ways to move that market forward. You know, and look, plugins are fine. I chose not to do that because you have an engine. And that means you got to deal with oil and timing belts and plugs. I decided, why not? I mean, that's one headache, fewer bills to my mechanic. But there are a couple of car companies, Toyota's really the primary one, that has been very antithetical to full EVs. Others have embraced it. And I know it's a challenging time for auto dealers. They don't know how to do this. Do they have enough people to make the corrections or changes? I think we have to pursue offshore. I think the issues are not very existent right now. It's really financing. We have two that are operating along the East Coast. I think when we have 10 or 20 or 30 facilities, and then we can actually connect them like a backbone, and we can shift power up and down the coast. I mean, that's really the grand plan, is to have that kind of situation.
But my follow-up, Mr. Chair, would be, again, when you went through the presentation, there's the plan on paper, and then there's the reality of the situation. You have offshore wind developers that have pulled out of other states. They're basically saying it's not in their best financial interest, which means they're going to come back looking for subsidies, which we're facing on Maryland budget challenges right here. That's the reality of what we're dealing with. So I believe that we as a committee have to look at, what the policies are, but what is the reality. And as far as, the national representative you might have mentioned, my information is coming directly from my local auto dealers who has made the investment and is showing us the challenges of implementing this policy and exactly what it would mean to her workforce and what it would mean to my constituents going across border lines to buy automobiles. That affects both my constituents and the workforce in my local area. So that's why I just, it seemed like the solar, while there's challenges, didn't seem to have maybe as many of the challenges that the other areas that you actually acknowledged in your presentation.
Just a very brief answer. With the clean car legislation, I don't think we have to worry about people crossing over to Delaware or to Pennsylvania when the number of states, California and 10 or 12 others, reach 40 or 50%. All of Detroit is going to change. This is not going to be done. They're not going to keep two different models going on. I mean, that's not how it works. I mean, the people who build these, if they understand they can't sell in California and Maryland and 10 other states, they're going to change the model. So I think ultimately this is a national issue, and by states like Maryland signing on to the clean cars, it's going to hasten that. And there won't be an issue of two different types and people running to another state to buy their car.
Okay, we're going to go to Vice Chair Kagan, and then we're going to go back to Senator Hester.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Former Chair, it's so great to have you back in this room, and thank you for all that you're doing for Maryland's future and our planet's future. And Ian Ullman is now in the room, so just want to acknowledge him as well. Your longtime aide de camp and chief of staff and all that. I have actually a bunch of questions. I'm going to run through them fairly quickly. First, I want to give a shout out to Landon and some of the rest of your team for working with me on the green bill to help nonprofits shift towards green energy. You talked about schools, which is such an enormous opportunity. And if we can put solar panels on many schools around the state, I think that would have a huge impact. I just wanted to make sure you're aware of the federal program that was inspired by our green bill here. And there's $500 million that is being distributed nationally. So I just want to say that publicly and make sure folks know about it. And what I don't know is whether counties need to apply or whether the states can apply and help distribute it or something. But the money's available, and I think it could really help us get those schools.
We'll check on that.
That'd be great. Next, the SERP. I went onto your website and I did a search, and it was hard to find. It was technical. I couldn't find the application. And then when I found the application, it was really technical and it couldn't be translated into any other languages. So I wanted to encourage you. It's got system owners and it talks about revocable and regulations and contractor information. It seems like it's not friendly if we are trying to look for the commercial clean energy rebate program. If we want to make it ethnically and financially, socioeconomically diverse, I'm not sure that we're doing that with the way this is set up. I found your website and I've been on it much of the time that you've been speaking, and I'm finding it not as user-friendly as I'd like. So I just want to offer that suggestion. Seems like, yeah, so for your consideration on that. On page 27, mirroring my good friend, Senator Brooks. Oh, I'm sorry, you want to talk about?
Just that I believe that program is oversubscribed. So we've run out of money. Again, that does not dismiss your concerns.
So maybe it's a next fiscal year, or maybe when the money is replenished, or however that would work. But if we can make it easier, I think that would be
Agreed.
good, and easier to find. It really, I had to go down a lot of rabbit holes to find it. Page 27 of your, you do not need to pull it up. It said on there that MEA will apply for several IRA program, the Inflation Reduction Act, and yet on your website, your own website, under federal opportunities, there's some of them. For instance, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program, the application must be submitted to MEA by MEA to DOE by no later than July 31, 2023. So either the website is outdated or the PowerPoint was outdated or something, but I know we've had press coverage of missed opportunities and money that we've left on the table. So I do want to make sure that left hand, right hand, and that if federal funds are available to help us electrify and all that, that we are taking advantage of those and not missing deadlines. And I think you want to talk to that one.
Oh, definitely. One of the first things we did at MEA when the IRA and the IIJA were passed is bring on a federal team to help us go after funds. But I have some really good news. We have applied for the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant. We're currently in the process of working through the details with the Department of Energy as they review our application. And for the Inflation Reduction Act rebates, we have applied for what's called early admin funds. And what that means is those are the funds where DOE would grant the funds to allow us to have resources to start implementing the programs. So gives us resources to bring people, consultants, help on board to start implementing the program. And DOE anticipates to review and grant that award within 30 to 60 days.
And I might add very briefly, Madam Vice Chair, the affected agencies, Department of Environment, Energy Administration, Agriculture, and DNR, I believe, have been meeting regularly since all this was announced. Some are formulaic and some are competitive. And for numbers of reasons, we didn't apply for a lot, but we helped other agencies. So other agencies took the lead on many of these.
I think this is then what needs to be updated, because it does look like you haven't even stepped up to the plate yet when it says will apply for several, federal programs. So just so we know what might be coming down the pike, I think that would be helpful. And going back to the CERP, it says on there specifically that it's not a competitive program, sort of just get in line. So again, that's if the money isn't available, don't waste your time. Maybe if I wait a few months, I can get this $1,000 back. That might be helpful information to know if that makes the difference for me deciding to put solar panels on my roof or something. And
we appreciate that. At the foundation, we're having discussions, and we know you will too, whether that's the program that should continue. In other words, gets back to what the chairman said, $1,000 on a $25,000, and I don't want to pick a community, but I'm going to pick Potomac, getting $1,000, is that really the difference?
Right.
And is it best served elsewhere? So we're having internal conversations. I'm sure you as a committee will have conversations of where the focus should be and should there be income limitations. So I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too far.
Sure.
If in fact we change our direction.
Yep. Last thing, and this is both substantive and I just want to muse about it. And normally I wouldn't give a shout out to a business very often, but I have been impressed as a member of Kaiser Permanente to see that in Gaithersburg and at their Shady Grove facilities, huge facilities, that their parking lots are all solar, and it's exciting. So I'm curious to know, is there an incentive that helped them do this? Is it they're good guys? Is it that they know that their, electricity bills are going to go way down? I'm curious why a business like that makes that kind of investment in the transition, and how we can role model that to make sure that others see the benefits.
And Kaiser has been a serial grantee of the agency across multiple sites. They've taken advantage of programs for parking canopy, solar over parking, which also includes EV charging as part of the design, as well as we're working with them on a fuel cell project that also will help provide resiliency to help keep those facilities operational. So in terms, I can't speak for them, but in businesses like them and organizations like them, they often are they're looking at the business case, dollars and cents, and what's needed to close the gap financially, but they're also looking at functions like, can they keep their operations going? And so that all goes into the decision-making of a business making, or any organization making a decision to adopt a technology.
And I would add another example is IKEA in College Park. They have parking lot arrays, and they have been recipients of our grants as well.
And White Marsh.
Let me just have a District 17 reference, Mr. Chairman, with my Gaithersburg and Rockville. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One thing, I think this issue of accessing federal money, we don't want to, leave anything on the table. I think it's really important that we have a sense, I think even on this committee, that we've done everything we can to get some of that federal money. So I guess I'm looking for a commitment that if we, in fact, that 30 to 60 days, we get some federal largesse grant money, I think the committee would really like to know that, as opposed to finding out 6 months from now, because it could shape kind of our view on some of the other policy calls we have here if we know that has happened. So I'll just put that out there. And with that, we're going to go to Senator Hester next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome back, Director Pinsky. It's great to see you again. I'd like to commend you and your staff for the hard work that you've done this summer on solar energy. As you know, I took on the issue of solar siting, or tried to. It's a big task. I have 4 questions, which you don't have to answer now, unless you want to, in the interest of time. So my first question is about, we've looked at the issue of state lands and like where solar siting could take place on state lands. And I'm wondering if you could get back to us with a description of I think staff said that there was some kind of program that you were doing to help state agencies identify where solar would be good. If we could get a little more information on that, that's my first question. The second question is around just data centers and what, if there's a recommendation around, how we provide the energy necessary in those areas. The third question is kind of a random one, but somebody approached me about a lot of runoff from a solar farm in our district, and it was because they were putting pesticides underneath the bottom part of the solar panels. And so I'm just curious if we have any requirements around pesticides on, the larger solar fields. I mean, they were also advocating for sheep grazing, which we have as well. So just curious about that. And last but not least, there's so much going on, and I really commend, all of this work. We've got the solar stuff, we've got the climate pathways report, we've got the electrification study. I feel like somebody should be doing something on transmission, but I feel like we've got the pieces to the puzzle, but maybe not the master puzzle plan. Do you guys feel at all like we need a larger energy policy just to make sure that our grid is ready for the next 10 years?
Let me start with the last question briefly. Our policy director is not here, but we are looking at the whole transmission issue. I mean, can it move energy? Is the infrastructure strong enough, large enough to do that? And I spoke with Ryan, our director, and he said, out X years for X gigawatts, we're good, but beyond that, it's trouble. And I think a lot of people are looking at it, PJM as well. And there's been talk of having a national grid or national coordination, let me say. And there's a name to it, and I can't remember what it is. So I think I think the concern is there. And I think people realize that when we start getting 2 gigawatts here, 3 gigawatts there, it's going to be a challenge. So I'm not sure the parts are in place. I think the awareness and concern is there. I wouldn't go so far as saying we have all the parts, because I think it's going to take a major infusion of money to upgrade our infrastructure to move across country or north and south or east and west. The governor's bill on data centers, I don't think it's been dropped yet. Maybe it has. But I'd like to take a rain check on that and come back to you on that question.
You mentioned, Senator, technical assistance to state agencies and also thinking about local governments in helping them identify which sites are suitable for solar, thinking about the built environment, parking lots, buildings. We have a technical assistance program, which we work with almost a dozen local governments to help them assess facilities for the placement of solar on their roofs or their parking, or could be structured parking, but more often it's parking lot. And we also have worked with state agencies as well. We worked with the Maryland State Parks to review their facilities for potential solar opportunities, and they are currently moving forward with a supplemental grant from MEA to put solar on a number of park facilities where they can serve an educational purpose, as well as help reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, any additional questions for Director Pinsky or his team? Okay, seeing none, that concludes our briefing. Excellent job. That was, again, very informative, very informative.
Great. Thank you all.
Okay, folks, we have to break for 5 minutes to do the reset. We'll come back for a short set of relatively straightforward bills, and then we'll do a very short voting session. We got a couple of bills because we're still in the game for the brass ring or whatever. So we're going to do that, but come back here in about 5 minutes or so and we'll knock out these bills. Okay.